So welcome to all of you. Those of you who are just joining us, this bridge event is pretty brief. We've been conducting very short lunchtime chats to share some of our most recent research out of the Regional Education Laboratory Northeast and Islands. This one will share a recent study we've completed on teacher demographics and evaluation, a descriptive study in a large urban district. And this is hosted by our Northeast Educator Effectiveness Research Alliance. Our agenda is to hear the key findings of a study that examine the role of teacher characteristics in educator evaluation using teacher demographic and evaluation data from one large urban district in our region over 3 years. This study will be findings will be shared by Dr. Jessica Bailey, who is the lead researcher on the study. And we're delighted to have Craig Waterman from the Massachusetts Department of Education join us today to share his perspectives on the study and the issues it raises, and then to have time to answer your questions and share out your comments. So please be sure and put those in the chat. This research and this event is sponsored by the Regional Education Laboratory Northeast and Islands Research Alliance focused on educator effectiveness. The goal of this alliance has been for the past 5 years to provide research to support states and districts' educator evaluation systems and to build states and districts' capacity to evaluate their own systems. Our work has focused on 3 main topic areas over these the regional lab contract, to shed light on educator evaluation measures, to investigate the relationship of professional development and evaluation, and to explore lessons learned from implementation of new systems in our region. So we're delighted you could be here today to learn with us from this study. And I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Bailey to lead us through the study.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone. I want to begin by talking about the background of this study and what our impetus was, who it involved, and what it involved. So the interest originally came from our Alliance members in wanting to better understand the role of teacher characteristics in evaluation. And when we began to investigate this topic, we found that there was a lack of literature really delving into this topic. And so we found that the literature was really looking at teacher characteristics in terms of their credentials or personality characteristics and evaluation ratings, but not specifically teachers' demographic characteristics. And so we wanted to address this gap in the literature and help our members. We partnered with a district in the REL Northeast and Islands region that was facing concerns about disparities in their evaluation system. And in this large urban district, there was public concern that racial and ethnic minority teachers may be more likely than other teachers to be identified for possible dismissal as a result of their evaluation rating. And the district officials saw a need for an independent group to investigate this issue and assist with considering the study's implications for future policies and system revisions. So we examined data for teachers who are eligible to receive a summative performance rating in 1 or more of 3 of our study years. We started with the year 2012-13 and examined that year, 13-14, and 14-15. And we examined teachers' demographic characteristics, age, race, ethnicity, and gender, and their summative performance ratings. And those ratings are the focus of this study, and I'll refer to them just as evaluation ratings or ratings. And these ratings may have been received at the end of a 1-year plan or a 2-year plan, which I'll discuss in just a moment. We combined the 4 original ratings into 2 categories. So below proficient includes the needs improvement and unsatisfactory categories. And at least proficient are those who scored proficient and exemplary. And the percentage of teachers in the below proficient category ranged from 6 to 8% across the 3 years, and those teachers were the focus of this study. We had 2 research questions that were driving this study. The first entailed looking at each of the 3 school years And the second looked at improvement from each of the years. So from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, and year 1 to year 3. And for this presentation, we focused just on those changes from year 1 to year 3. In our full report, which is available in the download pod, we present, obviously, all of the findings from the study, but today we'll just focus on improvement from year 1 to year 3. So just a little bit about our data and method before we go into the findings. As I mentioned, we examined teachers' demographic data, so that's their race, ethnicity, age, and gender. And we looked at their summative evaluation ratings, and those ratings in 2013, 14, and 15. And I just want to raise an important note that the number of teachers with a rating varied by year because some teachers entered the district and other teachers left. And many were moving from a one-year evaluation plan to a two-year evaluation plan. And therefore, if they were on a two-year plan, they received a formative evaluation rating during the first year of the two-year plan. So there was some movement in the number of teachers that we were able to look at in each year, and this was really related to our first research question. However, there were approximately 3,000 teachers that we were looking at each year, but it did decrease over these 3 years because some were being placed on a two-year plan and not receiving a summative performance rating. So our methods were descriptive. We just used cross tabulations of frequencies and percentages. And for research question 1, we compared the percentage of teachers rated below proficient within each teacher characteristic category for each of the 3 years. And for research question 2, pertaining to improvement over time, we compared the percentages of teachers with a summative performance rating who improved their rating between each of the 3 years. And like I said, for this presentation, I'll only focus on the results from the improvement from the first year to the third year, 2013 to 2015. And that analysis did use the same teachers in each of those years. And then we also did conduct the missing data analyses to examine possible differences between the characteristics of teachers who had a rating in each year and those who did not, or those who had a rating in the first year and those who were missing a rating in the third year for our second research question. And we did find some significant differences, but I'm not going to go into details of those now, and the report does discuss those analyses in detail. Okay, so our first step that we did, and the first finding that we have here, is we compared the percentages of teachers with below proficient ratings to their representation in the population just to get a sense of the overall distribution of ratings in the population and for those with below proficient ratings. So we found, as the slide says here, that a disproportionately large percentage of Black teachers, older teachers, and male teachers were rated below proficient compared with their representation in the population. And just to break that down a little bit, so for example, Black teachers accounted for 22 to 23% of teachers with a rating in each year, but 35 to 43% of teachers rated below proficient each year. Teachers age 15 older accounted for 23 to 27% of teachers with a rating in each year, but 42 to 49% of teachers rated below proficient each year. And similarly for males, they accounted for about a quarter of teachers with a rating each year, but 36 to 37% of teachers rated below proficient each year. We found that disparities were present in the population of teachers rated below proficient. So our second finding was related to our first research question concerning those rated below proficient each year. And we found meaningful results by race and age. And figure 1 here presents the results just by race. So we found that in all 3 years, the percentage of teachers with summative performance ratings who are rated below proficient was higher among Black teachers than their white counterparts. So specifically in 2012-13, 15% of Black teachers with a rating were rated below proficient compared to 5% of white teachers and 8% of other minority teachers. And the difference in 2013 and 14 and 15 weren't quite as pronounced. It narrowed from about 10 percentage points to 6 percentage points between the groups. And although not shown on the figure here, we found a similar pattern by age, where in all 3 years, a higher percentage of older teachers were rated below proficient. For example, in the first year, 2012-13, 14% of teachers aged 15 older were rated below proficient, compared to 5% of teachers aged 30 to 49, and 5% aged younger than 30. And in 2014-15, these percentages were 11 for those older than 50, and 5% and 4% for those in the younger categories. So one point just to keep in mind here is that the number of teachers receiving these ratings in each year was different and did decrease over time. Therefore, the reported percentages of teachers by characteristic might differ due to the changing population of teachers examined. So we're not emphasizing too much the year-to-year differences here, but that's where our next finding when we're looking at improvement over time really comes into play, because we're using the same teachers in the analysis. So when we looked at teachers who were eligible to improve over time, meaning that they weren't at the top category, that they had room for improvement, we found that the percentage of teachers making improvement in their rating was actually fairly consistent across these race, ethnicity, age, and gender categories. So in other words, the rates of improvement were consistent, and they were improving at the same rate by characteristics. So for example, the difference in the percentage of teachers who improved their rating from 2012-13 to 2014-15 was 5 percentage points or less across the age categories. And it was 2 percentage points between Black and other minority teachers, and 2 percentage points between Black and white teachers, and only 1 percentage point between female and male teachers. So to us, this really, our interpretation of this was really that there weren't any real meaningful differences here in terms of teacher characteristics and improvement over time. So those are the main findings, and now I want to turn and talk a little bit about the implications of these findings and some further research. So as I had mentioned initially, that the district we worked with on this study had concerns about disparities by teacher characteristics, and there was specific concern about Black teachers receiving lower ratings. And our independent analysis did confirm these concerns. We found that a disproportionately large percentage of Black teachers, older teachers, and male teachers were rated below proficient compared to their representation in the population of teachers. And while the percentage of Black teachers and older teachers who were rated below proficient decreased over time in some cases, gaps between their ratings and the ratings of their counterparts persisted. And we didn't see any variation by teacher characteristics in the percentages of teachers who improved their ratings over time. Essentially, all groups were improving at the same rate. So further research could investigate the root causes of these disproportionalities, and if those are better understood, then the district could consider what programs or policies aimed specifically at these teachers and their evaluators excuse me, may increase their chances for improvement and reduce the gap. And so some additional research might help uncover these patterns. And it might include things like looking at other contextual factors that may contribute to teachers' ratings, such as the characteristics of the schools that they teach in, or the evaluator demographic characteristics, such as their age and ethnicity and race and gender, and the demographic match between teachers and evaluators. We weren't able to do that in this study because of the data limitation. Was something that would have been very interesting. We could also look at patterns of mobility and retention of teachers by characteristic over time. The changing teaching population here, specifically changes among teachers who were receiving a rating in each year, may have contributed to the patterns that we observed and would warrant further observation analysis. And so it would also be interesting to look at the extent to which targeted support to subgroups of teachers, such as an effort to provide support to male and minority teachers, may improve their evaluation outcomes. So there's lots left to do. But one thing I was hoping that you could do just quietly to yourself is, before I turn it over to our discussant, is just to take a moment to reflect on whether these findings are similar to those in your own context, whether you know in your own school, district, or state what results like this might be. So think about whether they do relate to what you know, and if so, how do you know? What data sources have you used to confirm your assertion? Are your sources anecdotal? What data could you use to inform them? And if you don't know, have you found different patterns? Or if they don't resonate with you, have you found different patterns? And what are they? What data sources do you have to confirm this? And if you don't know, what data could you use to find out? With the right data, and this is crucial, you can undertake these analyses as well. The analyses that we undertook were descriptive. There wasn't much complicated about doing what we did, but it did take a great deal of data cleaning and preparation. However, I think it's very important that districts and states conduct analyses like this, and I think it would be possible for you to do so. You could look at our report and specifically our data and methodology for some examples of how you might go about this. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Craig Waterman, the Assessment Coordinator at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. He's worked on supporting the state's educator evaluation system as it's been implemented over the last 5 years, and is going to offer some remarks about the study's findings and its importance. So Craig, take it away.
Great, thank you so much. Are you going to switch to the next slide? There you go. Great, thanks. This is something that we were aware of in Massachusetts, the same pattern we saw in Massachusetts at large. One of the things that we think is really important is the importance of really digging down and looking at the context. One of the challenges with educator evaluation, obviously, is that the state has a framework, but the way it's implemented is somewhat dependent on the district, and the school will be rated less than proficient, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory. But they actually were also more likely to be rated exemplary. So they had a flatter distribution. And so it's unclear to us if this is an indication of any potential bias, any real differences, or potentially, since teachers aren't randomly assigned to school, this could just be a reflection of differences in the way that educator evaluation is implemented school to school, district to district. So those are all some things that we've thought about. We have several different strategies that we're using to sort of dig into these type of issues. One of the ones that we've done with districts is an educator evaluation dashboard, which allows district leaders to look at not just the distribution of their ratings, but to look at how ratings are consistent across school, to look at what the relationship is between ratings and other pieces of evidence as an effort to triangulate information around how educator evaluation is working. And so that's one tool. One of the things that I mentioned was a potential cause was just how educator evaluation is implemented consistently. A tool that we have that we really like is an online calibration tool, and this is a collection of resources and also a library of video of teachers teaching, which allows groups of educators from a district is how it's designed to all observe the same video and then do a lot of work around calibrating results. One of the things we've noticed is often on initial implementation, a district will actually have a pretty wide range of scores for the same video. So also on a more not necessarily on the teachers, but just we're also concerned around just equitable access from the student perspective. So those are all some strategies that we're doing. You can learn more about our data. I have a link down at the bottom here. But yeah, so I think all in all, I think, to sort of dig into this data, and follow up. So.
Thanks, Craig, so much. I see that there's been a lot of questions coming in, and Craig, I think your interesting reflections have probably prompted quite a bit more. So I think, thank you. So I think we have some time now, about 9 minutes or so, that we can answer questions, and both myself and Craig are available to answer some of these great questions that are coming in. So,
so one that I saw was a question around, what do we know about the demographics of the teacher's evaluator, and unfortunately in Massachusetts we don't have that data linked, so we're not able to look at the demographics of the evaluator.
Right. And as well as in our district as well that we were working in, the district didn't have any linkages between the evaluator and the teachers. So it's something that when we were presenting this study at first as a concept paper to IES, they kept asking, can you look at this, can you look at this? There was a lot of interest in that, and it's something that if data systems, as they progress, it's something to keep in mind about making those linkages that research like this can be conducted, because it would be very interesting. And someone else asked about some of the data. Let me see if I can find that. Someone asked about, did you consider looking at experience and not age? And that is, yes, we did initially look at experience, and we tried to look at different levels of experience, but unfortunately it just wasn't clean enough for us to do that. We only had, I think we only had the experience in the district system and not necessarily experience outside of the system, and if they had left and come back, then it kind of reset and started over, so it just wasn't a clean variable. So we figured age was really a proxy for experience. Similarly, we had attempted to look at school level, but again, that wasn't very clean cut because some schools were K-6, some were just, K-5. There was just a mix of different school levels there, so it wasn't clean enough for us to do that analysis. Go ahead.
Jessica, I just wondered about if you and Craig have suggestions for how districts might share these kinds of data points with evaluators directly to kind of explore and investigate why it might be happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think concretely the strategy that we have is we have a district-facing tool, that allows the superintendent to work with their evaluation team. Typically that's principals, but may include others, to look at a bunch of different metrics to see how the system is working as a system, and looking at fairness and consistency is one aspect of that. The important thing to keep in mind always is that we're able to sort of feed back several different quantitative pieces of information, but we sort of hold true to that idea of it being a dashboard. If your car's overheating, you don't necessarily know why it's overheating, so you still need to dig in and sort of figure out why. So that's one concrete way that we've really tried to encourage districts to look at their data. The challenge, obviously, with most districts in Massachusetts, sample size is a pretty huge issue. We're dealing with potentially 100 teachers and things like that. So.
Yeah, and if I can just add on to that, Susan, I think a great way that that districts could share findings like this with their own evaluators. So our full report here that's available for download, I don't know, it might be 25 pages long or so. That's probably a bit dense for most people to pick up and read, but we will have published soon a stated briefly document, which is exactly that. It states the findings in brief. It doesn't include all the appendices and descriptions of analyses, things like that. So that might be something, it's 5 pages that just this district in particular, others could share with evaluators to just make them more aware of these types of situations that are going on and findings that are, that are coming forward.
I think that would be very helpful, Jessica. And I also, there's a question about raising of whether the evaluation practices have been changed throughout the years. And I think particularly in Massachusetts, Craig, you might speak to how the new evaluation systems have been implemented. That I would guess that since many of the evaluation systems are relatively new, implemented in the last few years, that evaluators themselves are continuing to get better at the work that they do to evaluate teachers. I wonder, Craig, if you could speak to what some of the districts are doing to improve evaluators' use of the new systems.
No, that's a great. I think one of the things that is important to keep in mind in the Massachusetts context is that the state has a framework, but districts are implementing their own systems, and so there are certain districts that have made lots of changes, certain districts that jumped off very quickly, other districts that have been pretty slow. So there's a high degree of variance. I would say in the past 4 or 5 years, tasks such as goal setting SMART goals, increasing the number of observations, getting systems to do that, data management. Those are all things that I think we've seen pretty consistently across the board improve, across the state. Probably the biggest area that we've seen a challenge is around using evidence of student learning within the evaluation framework. As it's currently as the framework is currently designed, educators would actually receive a separate rating based solely on evidence of student learning. And we've heard pretty consistently from stakeholders that that's challenging. And so we actually have just brought to the board proposed regulations that would actually include that piece of evidence of student learning within the summative rating, so that districts wouldn't be required to have an individual rating just on student learning. So that's a concrete example of a challenge that we're trying to make some shifts to address. We hear from a lot of districts self-reporting that they're using evidence of student learning, but I think there's still a lot of work that needs to go into really doing it consistently, particularly in grades that aren't traditionally assessed. High school social studies, arts, things like that.
We're very much learning and continuing to evolve these systems. I think that's a great example of learning from practice. Scott Harrison in Maine is asking whether evaluators need to pass or maintain a rater calibration test before serving as evaluators.
So there's no requirement at the state level to do that. Individual districts, may be doing things like that.
In this particular district, they did. They do have a pretty intensive rater calibration, not a test, but they have training for them, and they do that every year. And since these findings have been, we've been sharing them with the district, they've actually incorporated some implicit bias into their evaluator training. I think they have an online module about that. And so that's been something that, to answer Matthew's question about some of the district's response to these findings, is that they weren't surprised. It kind of validated what they already knew and had analyzed on their own. And so, and like I said, they've been trying to incorporate some methods like this implicit bias training to help address any issues like that. So we're almost out of time. We just have about a minute left. We'll try to answer any question. There's one from Jerome here, and I think that, Craig, this might be one that you could answer.
I would be happy to answer it. Yeah, so we do notice some significant differences both in SGP and within educator evaluation ratings between non-PTS and PTS teachers, so teachers that generally have been in their district over 3 years. We have a challenge in our data systems around exactly how we track new teachers that we've addressed. So we always sort of have to make a mock-up version of who's a new teacher, but as a general rule, we do see confirmation, which generally is supported by research that, we see growth, especially in the first 3 years around educator effectiveness.
That's a great place to stop. We are out of time, but I want to thank you both, Jessica and Craig, for sharing the study and your insights from Massachusetts. Craig, I think that this study in particular just really underscores our need to continue to gather, use data, and examine the systems to think about what improvements may be needed, what can we learn from them as we go forward. So this has been very helpful to inform that. And I'd like to thank all of you who joined us today and ask you to please take a minute and complete our stakeholder feedback survey. We do use this information to make improvements, and it's very valuable. So thank you very much to all of you.